The events at Chernobyl were honestly absolutely horrible. Plumes of radiation, people abandoned by their governments, a global event that went unnoticed for days because of the secrecy of the USSR. In today's episode, we're going to be looking at the top 10 secrets of Chernobyl that you might not know. From the amount of radiation released to the top secret military base hidden in the forest, and the 2,000-year-old prophecy that might herald Chernobyl as a trumpet of the end of days. Number 10. Radiation released. When you look at the damage that has been caused by the events of Chernobyl, you may be fooled into thinking that, perhaps, there wasn't all that much radiation actually released. The animal populations are now relatively stable, and there are clearly still plants and vegetation in the area, right? Well, if you do think that, you'd be terribly incorrect, because the levels of radiation released by Chernobyl were impossibly high. When Chernobyl popped its top in a violent steam explosion, the radiation levels of the reactor building climbed to before unseen levels. In fact, they were so high that the staff in the reactor building had trouble figuring out how high it actually was. The levels read off the scale on all the working dosimeters they had. Near the reactor core, it has been worked out that the levels of radiation were likely somewhere up around 300 sieverts per hour. For context, there are around 1,000 millisieverts present in every sievert, and it takes just 10,000 millisieverts to kill you in weeks. That's just 10 sieverts of exposure. A 300 sievert dose? That's death in minutes. These days, admittedly, the levels of radiation aren't quite as high, but pockets of radiation still exist in Chernobyl and the surrounding areas that can be incredibly dangerous if not monitored and appropriately prepared for. Number 9. Radioactive rain in Ireland. In fact, the radiation levels were so high and powerful that they managed to have effects over great swaths of the world. The cloud of radiation that emerged from the Chernobyl explosion spread itself over the whole of Europe, spreading as far away as Ireland. The explosion in the Ukraine-based nuclear facility occurred on Saturday, April 26th, and the first indications it had reached as far as Ireland came on May 2nd from an air filter sample collected in Dublin. Over the following days, it was found that there was widespread radioactive contamination across the island, with the deposits heaviest across the Midlands, the area of the border, and Ulster. Radioactivity in Dublin had apparently been increased by 30%. Much of this contamination was due to rain, which had washed radioactive material from the atmosphere into the soil, mainly iodine-131, cesium-134, and cesium-137. It was originally estimated that the people of Ireland were only exposed to 0.1 millisieverts of radiation that originated from Chernobyl, but later on, even that was considered to be an overestimate. Obviously, these low numbers of radiation caused no effects on the health of those in Ireland, but it did show just how far-reaching the effects of the explosion actually were. Number 8. The Red Forest. If you're a fan of the TV series 12 Monkeys, then the phrase Red Forest may fill you with a distinct sense of dread. It fills those of Ukraine with a distinctly similar feeling. The Red Forest is a 10 square kilometer area within the exclusion zone. Its trees have become a ginger brown colour due to the incredibly high levels of radiation that they have absorbed. The specific area that the Red Forest is located in is an area that received some of the most radiation from the Chernobyl meltdown. Heavy clouds of smoke and dust, deeply polluted with radioactive contamination, fell straight onto the forest, killing it dead. How much radiation did the trees absorb? 20 times the amount found in the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. After the disaster, during the cleanup operations, many of the pine trees were bulldozed and buried in a series of trenches by crews known as liquidators. These trenches were covered in a thick carpet of sand, and then pine saplings were planted on top. but the area is still highly polluted with radiation, and many people fear that as those buried trees decay, the radioactive contaminants will slowly leach into the groundwater. As such, people have evacuated far away from the area around the Red Forest. Number 7. The people weren't evacuated at first. The people of Pripyat were in an incredibly dangerous situation. The Chernobyl nuclear facility, the facility that Pripyat had been directly built to support, had spread its dangerous nuclear radiation across the city. And yet, the people weren't told. For 2 days, those in charge of managing the Chernobyl disaster did basically nothing for the people of Pripyat. They were stunned into inactivity by the events that were occurring at the plant and had been charged with getting it under control. As such, no one wanted to take the responsibility for trying to stage an evacuation. It would be seen as a failure. This went on for 2 whole days. 2 days of people being exposed to dangerous levels of radiation as the situation at the plant became worse and worse. Eventually, the people were evacuated on buses that had been soaking up radiation for those 2 days. And then they subsequently spread that radiation and radiation-soaked people around the cities and towns of the local area. Number 6. Tourism of Chernobyl. It turns out that while Chernobyl's events have made the exclusion zone one of the most dangerous on Earth, you can actually go and visit it whenever you want if you have the funds. There are in fact plenty of tourism agencies that will take people into the zone either on day trips or for more extended vacations. If you go for a day trip, you'll be allowed to see the sights of Pripyat, and if you're lucky, check out the sarcophagus that has been built to house the still toxic radioactive core. More extended vacations involve a stay in one of 2 hotels based in Chernobyl City, a largely abandoned city of the zone. Alternatively, you could hook up with the Urbex Explorers of Chernobyl, who are also known as the Stalkers. They'll take you on a technically illegal journey through the zone, involving looks at abandoned parts of Pripyat, overnight stays in spooky ghost farmyards, and plenty of hiking through the wilderness of the zone. Number 5. Some people still live there. As we've said multiple times in this video, Chernobyl caused the nearby cities, towns, farmland, and patches of wilderness to be completely inundated with radioactive pollution. People were eventually evacuated en masse. For the most part, people left, but some stayed behind, and some still live there, even now. These people are called the Samozli, illegal settlers who have defied the radiation and authorities alike to stay within the exclusion zone. There are supposedly between 200 and 2,000 of them, some of whom have been there from the start, and others who have returned over the years. According to the Minister of Social Policy of Ukraine in 2013, Natalia Korolevska, the settlers are still getting full support from the government, even if their existence in the zone is technically illegal, a fact that is not going to change in the future. The number of these Samozli tend to go down year on year, and most of those who live there are old and stubborn and have lived there since the beginning. For now, at least, they live in a unique situation, completely outside of standard Ukrainian society, embracing the zone wholeheartedly. Number 4. The zone hides a military base. The USSR was historically secretive. They would do everything and anything they could to keep their scientific breakthroughs and experiments a secret. Deep in the woods of the exclusion zone lurks a secret military base, Duga 3. Before the Chernobyl nuclear disaster, Duga 3 was so much of a secret that, on maps, it was identified as nothing more than a children's camp. When the steam explosions of Chernobyl ripped the reactor apart, the Duga 3 installation was completely abandoned and never used again. All we knew about it before that point was that it was transmitting a mysterious signal known as the woodpecker. The woodpecker signal remained a mystery, though conspiracy theorists pegged it as something that could have been a Soviet mind control station, or even weather experiments. But after the collapse of the USSR, we learned a bit more. The woodpecker was in fact a bleeding edge radar system designed to provide early warnings of intercontinental ballistic missile attacks that could preclude a nuclear war. It's almost ironic then that a nuclear disaster at Chernobyl was in fact what caused the station to be abandoned. Number 3. Sweden broke the news. You would think that after a terrible nuclear accident with consequences of potentially global proportions, the Soviet government would be all over telling people that something had gone terribly wrong and that they were working to fix it. But no, like I said earlier, the Soviet government was historically secretive, and it was up for other countries to find out that something had gone terribly wrong at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. It all began when an alarm began to chime at Forsmark, the second largest nuclear power plant in Sweden. An employee had walked past a dosimeter and it detected higher levels of radiation that were coming from his shoes. They were worried at first that something had gone horribly wrong at their own plant, before slowly coming to the realization that it was in fact Chernobyl, some 1,100 kilometers away, kicking out deadly radiation. The Swedish scientists ran analysis and found radioactive particles in the grass that was specific to Soviet technology. As well as that, during the weekend, the wind had blown in from the southeast and it had rained in northeastern Sweden, dropping radioactive fallout onto the ground in that area. All the evidence pointed to Chernobyl, and it was up to Sweden to make that declaration. It was this that forced the Soviets 2 days later to confirm the accident. If the Swedish scientists had never made their discoveries, who knows if the Soviets ever would have come clean about what happened. Number 2. Chernobyl was still in action. You would expect that after the horrific events of Chernobyl, the entire facility would be abandoned by standard workers and full efforts would be taken to getting the rampant radioactivity under control. But no, quite the opposite happened, and for the next 14 years after the explosion, Chernobyl chugged on as a primary generator of power in the region. Despite a 19-mile exclusion zone, despite the construction of the sarcophagus to keep radiation contained around the Unit 4 reactor, the officials kept the other 3 reactors operating for 14 years longer, and those reactors were all risks too. Unit 2 was eventually shut down in 1991 after being damaged in a fire. Unit 1 in 1996 after international outcry about the health effects of radiation poisoning. Unit 3, 2000, when international negotiations finally shut the plant down for good. But it wasn't like the Ukrainian government wanted to keep these temperamental reactors running for another 14 years. The Soviet economy was doing bad to begin with, and Chernobyl made it worse. Power shortages were rampant, and there wasn't a non-nuclear replacement that could generate the same levels of power. Decommissioning a power plant that uses nuclear energy isn't exactly easy either. And even now, the plant still isn't fully decommissioned, though it no longer creates power for the region. Number 1. The Wormwood Star. Behold, we are in the end of days. At least that's what the events of Chernobyl might seem to suggest. And the third angel sounded, and there fell a great star from heaven, burning as it were a lamp. And it fell upon the third part of the rivers and upon the fountains of waters, and the name of the star is called Wormwood. And the third part of the waters became wormwood, and many men died of the waters because they were made bitter. Revelation 8:10-11. Did you know that the word Chernobyl is in fact the Russian word for wormwood? A burning reactor made from radioactive material, which created a plume of radioactive material that drifted across the Soviet Union and over Europe, causing a large amount of radioactive rain to fall across the region. This rain brought the nuclear cloud into the soil, animals, crops, trees, and the river. The water was made bitter. Part of Chernobyl itself was implanted into it. Some believe that the events of Chernobyl, the events of Wormwood, were in fact the sounding of the third trumpet to herald the end of time, Judgment Day. I'm not one for religion, in fact I'm resolutely atheist, but the coincidence is astounding. A prophecy made 2,000 years ago in the Bible, seemingly reflected by the events of Chernobyl in 1986. That was our video on the 10 secrets that you might not have known about Chernobyl. Do you think we missed anything in this video? Did you learn anything that you didn't know about before? As always, if you liked today's video, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for even more interesting factual lists.